Three wonderful presentations this morning, one from a hands-on practitioner, one from an ex-farmer, and one from a practical academic, and they are very rare, trust me. So to do all of this, to do all of the conversations we've had this morning, the conversations you had last week, what we have to is include our farmed environment. Now, if I look specifically at England, where 70% of the landscape is in some form of agriculture, and we know that agriculture historically has hosted a wide range of species, and the potential for us to recolonize those areas where those species have been lost can be achieved, but it must be achieved in a way that allows farmers to adapt and change. And we look at the proposals from government over the last 6 years, and it's been a bit sluggish at times, and we're seeing a bit more greater clarity in the last few weeks. But it has to be sustainable. It fundamentally has to be economic. It has to be environmentally based, and it has to revolve around some sort of agricultural system. Interestingly, listening to the language this morning, where some of the presentations periodically referred to agricultural practices, the grazing of livestock, the fencing in of livestock, the importance of ground disturbance through from a wilding perspective, the utilization of pigs to ensure some sort of ground disturbance. And I'm interested in, interestingly, that Bill referred only to wilding and not rewilding. And in Isabella's book, she refers, it's called wilding, not rewilding. And it's about the return of nature to a British farm. So again and again and again, it's reinforced by farming and agriculture. And that fundamentally is how we can maintain the processes that Bill has just talked about, to ensuring there is heterogeneity within our farm landscapes. Everything that I've done in my career of managing land has tried to enforce a range of processes for a range of outcomes that is available for all species, very much based on the Lawton Report, to ensure that we have, some species prefer linear routes and some species prefer stepping stones. So it's ensuring that we can deliver that through our farm landscapes, because that's what I've been trying to do in my entire career. But it fundamentally has to be a whole farm approach. We cannot sideline nature to the corners of fields. It has to be, we talk about, I try to avoid the R words, whether it's rewilding or regenerative agriculture, because it's fraught with a load of prescriptions that don't necessarily fit every farm business from Cornwall to Cumbria, from Norfolk to Northumberland. So we must have a much more, it must be evidence-based, as Bill refers to, based on its area, its location, its soil type. So you cannot simply apply, and this is some of the problems with the prescriptions through government incentives. They haven't been flexible enough to be adopted. If adopted in one area, you might have success in Cornwall, but if you apply the same approaches in the uplands, actually you get a very different result. So we need to ensure that a whole farm approach in the delivery of restoring nature to our farm landscapes must be adaptive and flexible to ensure that those undertaking it have the ability to deliver on the ambition. And the ambition fundamentally is to restore nature into these areas, which we've seen probably some of the biggest declines within our farm landscape, specifically on birds, but most notably also invertebrates and the range of species through the application of a range of, from a farmer's perspective, plant protection products, but from everyone else, they call them pesticides. So we need to be adaptive, and we need to understand how that approach takes place. You know, I spoke to a dairy farmer in Hampshire who asked me, where do I make space for nature? And I can't make that call because I don't know his farm. And what we need is the advice that is, and that's something that we distinctly lack, is the sufficient advice to provide farmers on the best approach that they can make on their farm. First and foremost, farmers are food producers, and the vast majority of those farmers consider that as their primary role. What we have to, over time, is actually, if I look at Henderson's Farming Ladder, written in the 40s, where he had a mixed farming system because he wanted to spread his risk. So when milk was corn, when milk was high, corn was low. And the 21st century farmer, as I see it, needs to deliver a range of services alongside food production. Knepp Castle is a farm. They still refer to it as a farm. They produce an abundance of nature. They produce access and health and well-being for people, but they also produce protein. Yes, at relatively small levels, but they are producing a range of services. So if we can get farm businesses to understand that it could be the environment, it could be carbon, it could be food, it could be public access, and then we start to see the change within our landscapes, because absolutely right, this has to happen at scale. It is important to have these high rich nature sites. You know, the site I manage here, which is just under 4,000 hectares, is a high nature site, but it's buffeted by intensive agriculture. And that intensive agriculture needs actually to soften itself to enable the species within the protected site that is high nature to allow them to spread wider throughout the environment. Interestingly, we're in a site that in a farm that we've made more nature positive, we've identified species of Breckland bees, which have probably historically used to be able to move between the Brecks and the North Norfolk coast. Actually, they've become fragmented. So we need to be able to create this connectivity through our landscapes by making best use of agriculture and incentivizing it in a way that it has the uptake. So where do we start? How do we start to engage with farmers, and how do we get them to uptake a more nature positive way in the way they produce their food? Well, it's quite simple. Something that we have in England that no other country in the world has is a phenomenal network of hedges. Hedges are effectively managed scrub. And if we look at the success when scrub takes over, and if we look at the government's biodiversity metric for net gain that's due to come out later in the year, actually scrub has huge value. We look at Bill's earlier slides where there is low level of scrub. We see some of the greatest abundance of birds, but also invertebrates. So we have as many miles of hedgerows within England that we have sealed roads. That's a phenomenal natural capital asset that we can really utilize. So we need to incentivize the way we manage these linear lines of scrub that are networked across the country with a range of approaches. And, you know, we endlessly see on social media platforms where a farmer has brutally cut his hedge, or in some instances, a farmer has left his hedge for a considerable length of time, and it's turned into effectively a row of trees. Actually, the importance is actually a range of approaches that are managed in a way that are benefit to the natural environment. And what we need to do is sometimes look back in the past. So the coppicing or the laying, you know, the Cornish laying of hedgerows, the traditional coppicing of hedgerows in some counties. And we need to ensure that we have a system that incentivizes and give guidance to farmers in the way they manage their hedges. My frustration is, if we look at the current agri-environment schemes, which the guidance says that actually you should not cut your hedge to qualify for the payment. You should not cut your hedge more than 1 year in 3. So what do the farmers do? They cut their hedge every 3rd year. This is part of the problem, because the advice is wrong. The advice, as Bill says, is not evidence-based. We know that hedgerows left for a longer period can have a significant benefit. So not cut for 5 to 6 years is more beneficial. And we need to reward that style of management. We know that the coppicing or laying of a hedge 1 in 15 years actually has significant benefits, because it restarts the process, and the hedge the hedge will thereby provide a wider range of benefits for a longer period. The hedge in the picture hasn't been cut for 4 years, but at some point it will require some form of management. So it's trying to get farmers to be rewarded by the decision-making process, and start to see uptake of this. Then we will then see wider benefits to ensure that nature can move freely through the landscapes and at scale. The starting of processes. Some parts within the farm landscapes are not given sufficient reward for what they deliver. The simplicity of a farm track, which resets its process every time the tractor goes through it, so it maintains that bare ground, which is so important to a wide range of invertebrates. It allows for colonization of some of the early adopters, like the corn, like the marigold, or the poppy, or even the plantain that is actually a perennial. So, and the wild mignonette. So you have a range of species, and you have heterogeneity within in areas that are historically have been perceived as being providing no value, but they are of significant value, because they create the area of edge that the natural world requires. It needs we need different habitats sitting alongside each other, where if we look at the example of the oceans, where the cold water meets the warm water, there is invariably an abundance of aquatic life. And you can apply those same principles into our farm landscapes. I've talked about the language, and the language for me is so important to get farmers and land managers engaged in the delivery of this. And when we refer to margins, a margin is not a word that from an agricultural perspective that actually has any relevance at all. But if I refer to a hay meadow, immediately the farmer understands what a hay meadow is. And the hay meadow is a resetting of a process on an annual basis that the natural world has over time adopted and embraced. And we know the benefit. We've lost 97% of our hay meadows across the country. So how can we reinstate these hay meadows? Well, we reinstate them in linear lengths alongside and protecting and preserving our scrubland habitats that we refer to as hedgerows. And interestingly, with regard hedges, where we're the most deforested country in Europe, and I think it's about 12% deforestation. But if we were to reclassify our hedgerows as a type of forestry, would we then increase our forestation quite considerably? The bulk of countries in Europe, if I look at Germany and France, have about 13 to 15% of afforestation. But what they don't have is they don't have a wide network of hedgerows. So we can buffer our scrubland, our linear lengths of scrub with hay meadows, so we can put back some of these wonderful natural capital assets that we lost within the farm landscape. And then and then what we do from a farm perspective, when I start to talk to farmers in this regard, well, why do I want to put in a hay meadow? Because that's going to require management, and what am I going to do with the product? But actually, it's less about, from my perspective, it's less about the creation of the hay meadow when talking to the farmer or the land manager. It's about making their agricultural business more efficient. And whilst we're still using artificial fertilizers and we're still using pesticides, and we've seen in the last 12 months, we've seen this rapid inflation in farm inputs. I talk about farm efficiencies. I talk about ensuring that when they're applying these extortionately expensive inputs to maintain their yields, actually, by making space for nature within the farm landscape and making your field more efficient to enable you to reduce overlap of chemicals, excess fertilizers, runoff, diffuse pollution, actually you then get the farmers to embrace this application, and we start to see delivery. So I talked right at the start, it's about a whole farm approach. It's about delivering it at scale. So we have our hedgerows and we have our hay meadows that we've effectively repurposed. But it has to happen on the entire farm. So we look at the current conversations with restorative, regenerative, agroecology. There is a range of terms that are used. And when speaking to farmers, and we've also seen incentives, we're seeing a wider range of incentives for farmers to adopt systems or management tools to enable them to enhance their soils, because we are more than aware that our soils are degraded. Interestingly, I'm not trying to plug anyone else's book, but I've just started reading Henry Dimbleby's book, Ravenous, which talks, we currently have a food system that is addicted to inputs because the soil isn't fit for purpose. But if we can improve our soils by using nature-based solutions, we can then have the potential to reduce our costly inputs while still maintaining yields. So we use cover crops and catch crops, and we have companion planting. All of these are effectively trying to mimic nature within our food systems. And when I arrived at Holcombe, they were already understood the importance of protecting and preserving their soils and improving them, but they were following monoculture by monoculture. So what we've now adopted is an approach where we have multiple species doing a range, acting at in a range of different ways that provide benefits to, interestingly, when you have ground cover over arable cultivated land, you actually hold more water, whereas bare ground effectively dries out quicker. You have the interaction between different plants and the biology within the soils react to it. You store more carbon, and there are many different sorts of soil organic matter within the soil, some that are very beneficial to healthy soils but tend to disappear relatively quickly, and some that are maintained and preserved for longer periods, depending on the management style of the cultivation system. So it's early science, it's early, and what we do need, Bill, more than anything, is more evidence-based, because I have farmers coming up to me and saying, well, what species do I plant? What are the correct, how will one species interact with another that will be more beneficial for enabling me to reduce my artificial fertilizer input? Which species of flowers are important to plant in my hay meadows that will increase my predatory species to hopefully have an impact on some of my pest species within the food system? So farmers are actually asking these questions, and they're happy to adopt them through the incentives. But it's really important that we understand the right species in the right place for the right reasons within the farm landscape. So I referred earlier about hay meadows, and we've lost significant areas of them. And interestingly, this is a calcareous grass, calcareous grassland recreation. The field is now in its 11th year. It was a traditional, wheat, barley, maize, sugar beet, potatoes, and it sits next to a triple SI Iron Age fort, which is home to Norfolk's only population that I'm aware of chalk hill blue butterflies. And the triple SI has a range of orchids, pyramidal, bee orchid, and common spotted, to name a few. This field was sown next door with seed collected within 15 kilometers, with some wonderful advice from the Norfolk Flora Group on what species would be the correct species to sow. And when I arrived, the key indicators for the success of this field was the abundance of chalk hill blue butterflies that were using the site, which is approximately 30 acres, and also the abundance of orchids. The prescriptions that were provided through the government incentives were to cut and remove the summer growth between the middle of July and the middle of August. Actually, if you look historically about the management of chalk grassland, it was historically grazed through the winter by sheep or possibly cattle, because it was the drier land, and the sheep would be less susceptible to foot rot by grazing through the winter, and in the summer they would then graze the lowland lush grasses on the river valleys. So we changed the management, and we went against the prescriptions that were provided, and we changed the management to implement a traditional agricultural tool of grazing sheep through the winter. We didn't graze by dates. We grazed when we felt that the most of the flowering had been completed, and that tends to be any time between mid-September and mid-October. We would turn a relatively low stocking density of sheep, and we would graze it till it got to the point that the sheep had removed 90% of the vegetation. The length of time, that varied between 6 weeks and 16 weeks. And what we saw, the reaction, the natural reaction to this, is we saw that the species of orchids that had been counted at approximately 190, within 3 flowering seasons, were then in their thousands. Last year, which I know was a very special butterfly year because of the weather conditions, but we saw, having only recorded approximately 3 or 4 chalk hill blue butterflies, we saw the entire field covered with chalk hill blue butterflies. So we must understand that by utilizing some of the traditional agricultural approaches in a modern context, the benefits we can provide by increasing the abundance of nature within the farm landscape. The importance of baselining, the importance of measuring. I've been doing it everywhere I've gone. If we look, the reason that the success of Net Castle is because they baseline right at the start. When I part of my role as the director of conservation and managing the National Nature Reserve is that we measure and monitor nature. When we took on a test farm at Holcombe from a previous agricultural tenant, we baselined it immediately. We measured soil, we measured species abundance, we measured birds, bees, butterflies, bats, and then we implemented change. And what I've been calling for from government is actually to ensure that we baseline. At the moment, we're endlessly told we're the most nature depleted country, or one of the most nature depleted countries in the world, for a range of reasons. And if we look at the historic data from the BTO, which is generally starts in 1970s as the baseline for effectively the decline in a significant number of bird species within the farm landscapes. Actually, before we do the change of the new environmental land management scheme, before we decide to make significant space for nature by slightly, I don't want to use the word, but actually allowing natural processes to take place. Actually, if we baseline, we can see we start to provide ourselves with the evidence of whether we're succeeding or not. Measuring success and measuring is so important, specifically in the proposals that the UK government, with its incentives to pay farmers and land managers for different ways in which they manage the land. We've had 30 years of agri-environment and no one measured what we've done. So from my perspective, it's really important that we measure before we enact change. We baseline our nature, our biodiversity, our water quality, our air quality, to give us an indication of success. Interestingly, I sit on the RSPB England's advisory committee, and I recently asked them, well, what does success look like? And I can ask all of you the same question, because success in one person's eyes will be very different in another's. Is success nightingales returning to a North Suffolk farm? Is that success? Or is the success that actually the foxes are predating on all of the introduced species like the pheasant? I don't know. From my perspective, success is about a range of species being having the ability to replicate themselves in a landscape and at scale. Matt mentioned this morning right at the start. We need to manage it. Whether your management tool is large herbivores, whether your management tool is a 360 digger, nature needs all the help it can get, and we need to manage in a way that is sensitive, and we need to explain to others what good management looks like. All too often we get management like the image in the middle of a hedge that is brutalized on the 1st September every year, and serves little or no purpose. Whereas the hedge on the right, which is full and abundant of berries, has been cut on an annual basis for the last 15 years, but it's been cut sensitively. There is a shape, there is a managed shape to that hedge, but it still provides benefits to nature. The digging out of dikes, interestingly, the dike system on the reserve, when I arrived, the dikes were dug out on an annual basis across the site. I stopped digging out the dikes because I'll dig out a dike. I dig out a dike for a reason and for an objective, rather than trying to just follow a prescription of a perception of how water systems should be managed. So we do dig out dikes, but we dig them out when we have a reason to dig them out. And the simple things, by changing that practice, what we've seen, and then by measuring it, is we've seen species, the species that like the edges of dikes, like the reed bunting. We've seen record populations of reed buntings return to the reserve because we changed the way we managed it. We're not taking our foot off the gas, but we're just managing in a way that is that provides benefits to the wider environment. Interestingly, Bill came and visited the reserve in the summer, and I listened to his wise words of advice. And we have a series of natterjack pools that also have Jersey cudweed in them, and the Jersey cudweed has diminished in abundance. The natterjack pools have become vegetated up, and Bill's advice was actually reprofile some of them and redo them, and we've done that this year and are expecting to see the resetting of a process to allow those pools to become more favorable to natterjacks, because over time they have become unfavorable. So right decision for the right reason. Also within a farm system that still produces food, still provides benefits to nature, and also operates at significant scale. Thank you.
Neil Armichello, how do you get policy change directed towards ecosystem service-driven incentives? How do you see ELMS doing this?
Well, if I look at the the announcement on the 30th of January, which provided a range of an additional 6 standards within the sustainable farming incentive element of ELM. We see ELMS has the potential to deliver significant ecosystem services through the incentives that they're currently proposing. The frustration from many farmers, specifically the uplands, is we currently don't put a fiscal value on nature and the benefits that nature provides. Some of the work done by Henry Dimbleby's food strategy, we look at the descriptor review, and we look at everything that Dieter Helm talked about. It's actually, we need to start putting a value on these services, which currently we don't. We have the potential for private markets to deliver or to invest in this. My frustration is if I look at the landscape recovery pilot that I'm involved in, where everyone wants to deliver the capital element and are happy to pay for the change in land use, but they're not prepared to pay for the long-term management of it. And it's that long-term management, whether it's however it may be, whether it's the benefits for flooding, the benefits for cleaner water, the benefits for healthier soils. I don't think the environmental land management scheme doesn't truly value the other associated benefits to ecosystem services currently. But it's, as in the words of George Eustace, the environmental land management scheme is an evolution, not a revolution. It's just the slowest revolution I've ever witnessed.
Hamish Jackson, do you have any views on the forthcoming schedules of the Environment Act and the need to deliver a 10% measurable biodiversity net gain using the DEFRA metrics? Do you have concerns that this approach will not sufficiently evidence to deliver functional biodiversity net gains once it is a requirement across the UK by winter 2023?
Which model may I have?
Interestingly, I had an ecologist come and look at a site because we were looking at a potential development. And we had to find 2.77 units to achieve our 10% plus, and it was deeply uninspiring that we could find a bit of relatively poor grassland, and we could do minor actions and then deliver our 10%. I think 10% is farcical. I think actually it needs to be significantly more than that. And when you speak to most developers, they're looking at 20 to 30% increase because they also don't want to do it. So we need to start to find where we have trusted partners that can deliver this effectively. it's back to, the perception of what good looks like. If we have let something to develop into scrub and it becomes abundance with nature in year 20, if that scrub then becomes tall and woody, and then we see a reduction in, so there are flaws within the concept, but I think when we start, and also where we deliver it, and when we get greater clarity on the local nature recovery strategies that Natural England are developing, it makes complete sense to follow some of the Lawton principles on how we join the landscape up, utilising BNG as part of that. But there's some big figures being bandied about, and I haven't seen any deals done just yet. And there's a slight nervousness that BNG, biodiversity uplift, could go down the carbon route, where the land managers, the landowners, actually become nervous and less likely to implement some of these proposals. Bill's absolutely right. Developers build houses, they don't build ecosystems. So have the right people providing those services rather than expecting the developers to do it on site. We look at some of the disastrous developments where they can achieve their net gain on site, and there's a small piece of scrubby woodland within a housing complex that invariably becomes an area for antisocial behaviour and doesn't deliver any of its objectives.
Adam Gretton, would you welcome a new supplementary payment in ELMS for habitat connectivity? This has been encouraged in the past, but not directly paid for. Any have proposed this to DEFRA, and discussions on the detail continue.
I think that's kind of there, but it just doesn't have that name. So if we look at any of you that listened to Minister Spencer on the radio this morning following the challenges from the upland farmers earlier in the week about payment rates, actually they will be paying for farmers and land managers to work together. The landscape recovery pilots are about connectivity. Everything that we're doing is about ensuring we deliver connectivity. So I think it's there. It's just not that obvious.
Martin Sanford, we know the future will be different. Climate change will mean more frequent droughts, floods, fires and great storms. Can they be the force majeure that drives more landowners to reconsider how they use their land?
I think so. Farmers are at the forefront of experiencing climate change. They're the first ones to have to be it either being a washout or a flood, or actually seeing their crops shrivel up in front of their eyes because there's insufficient rain and high temperatures. So I think that I think they understand the importance of resilience to mitigate against climate change, and I think they're on a rather steep learning curve. And something that we lack more than anything is good impartial advice for farmers to understand how we can have food systems that are fit for purpose with extreme weather conditions. And it goes about plant breeding. It takes for a species of cereal to come through from the science lab and into the field can take up to 25 years. So we need to look at ways we can accelerate that.
Joan Hardingham, what will the impact of increasing areas of biodiversity on farms be on our ability to grow food here rather than importing it and trashing another country's environment?
Like classic NFU question. So it's I am of the firm belief that we can make space for nature and we can have high food systems and animal welfare systems within the UK. We can maintain our self-sufficiency. We can, through innovation, we can ensure food security. We need to, that's quite a complex system because it's about supply chains. And if we look at the scandal this week where we've been shipping in beef from Argentina, if we look at the egg scandal last autumn where eggs were coming in from Rome based on that they weren't free range, we need to ensure that we have a food system that's fit for purpose, because currently it's falling to pieces.